So we've briefly gone over what a domain name is, and we've established that it's separate from web hosting. They're two different services, although used together when building a website. So before we talk about what a domain name is, we have to understand what an IP address is. Alright, so IP address stands for Internet Protocol Address, and it's basically a numeric label which represents a computer or a server or a device that is connected to a network and or the internet. Okay, so the format would be something like this. Alright, we basically have 4 sets of numbers. The highest any of these can go to is 255 or 254, and IP addresses are used for network interface identification and location addressing. So basically, just like you have an address to your home, computers have an address, which is the IP address. Okay, so the example here is IP version 4, which is typically what you'll usually see, but sooner or later we're going to run out of combinations for IP4. So we also have something called IP version 6, and those IP addresses look like this. Okay, I'm not too fond of how this looks, but you know, we have to have it like that because we're going to run out of IP version 4. Okay, so there are local IPs and internet or external IPs. So if you have a wireless router in your home and you have, let's say, a desktop in your office, a laptop in your kids' room, and a desktop in your living room, each one of those have a separate IP address on your network. Alright, and those typically look like, let me just type it in here, typically something like this, or something like 192.168.1.1, something like that. And those are examples of local IP addresses. It's only in your network. And then you have one external IP which looks like this, alright, and that's what the internet sees. The internet doesn't see those private IP addresses for each one of your machines. It looks at your router and your cable modem or whatever you use, and it gets the one external IP address. Okay, so that's the difference between local and external. So now, what's a domain name? A domain name is used to represent an IP address in human readable form, such as google.com. Okay, so every domain points to an IP address somewhere, and what's used to translate an IP to a domain name is called the DNS, or the Domain Name Service. Okay, so that's what's responsible for translating IPs. Domain names have to include a top-level domain, .com, .net, .org, or one of the many others. Alright, so DNS Name Servers. This is how you can buy a domain. Let's say you buy a domain from GoDaddy, but you want it pointed to your hosting account with HostGator. Well, you can do that by logging into the domain control panel and looking for the option to add your own name servers, or to change the name servers. And then you would add HostGator's name servers, and they would look like this. These actually are HostGator's name servers: ns1.hostgator.com and ns2.hostgator.com. Typically there'll always be 2 name servers. And later on I'll actually log into my domain control panel and show you this, where you can change this. Alright, so top-level domains we've briefly discussed. There's a few different categories for top-level domains. The most popular is generic. So generic would be .com, .net, .info, .org. And then if you're in the US, as I am, you can also see edu, .edu, .gov, .mil, which is for military. Alright, so those are US TLDs. And there's a whole bunch more, and there's a lot of different ones that are for different countries as well. So domain name rules, these are things that you need to follow when you're creating a new domain. So they have to be alphanumeric, so numbers and letters are okay. Although I don't think you can start it with a number, but I'm not positive. They're case insensitive. Google.com lowercase is the exact same as uppercase Google.com. Alright, now if you type this in, if you type in google.com with all uppercase, the browser will actually translate them to lowercase. You can use dashes or hyphens, which are basically the same thing. They are this symbol. Okay, that's the only symbol that you can use in your domain, and I would suggest that you try not to use them, just for SEO purposes, and it just doesn't look as good. The max length of this part of the domain is 63 characters. Okay, this is actually called the label. That's the label part of the domain. If you count the TLD and the HTTP, it goes up to, I think it's like 78 characters or something like that. But you definitely don't want to use a 63 character long domain. The shorter the better. And speaking of that, we'll go into some tips. Alright, so these are not mandatory, but these are just tips that are suggested when you're creating a domain name or thinking of a domain name. You always want to try to get the .com. Alright, when talking about search engines and the TLDs, I don't think that there's any difference as far as where your result is on the search engine, whether you use .com, .net, as long as it's a top-level domain. I really don't think it matters in that term. But the reason you want a .com is if someone remembers the label part of your domain, they're instantly, if they don't know for sure that it's .net or .org or whatever, then chances are they're going to type in .com. All right, and if you have a .net and someone else has the .com, then you're probably competitors. So you might have people going to your competitor's site that actually wanted to come to yours. So that's my opinion on why you should always use a .com if possible. Of course, there's times when you need a certain domain label, but only .net is available. They should be search engine friendly. Try not to use dashes or numbers. Try to keep it all letters if possible. Try to include important keywords that relate directly to your content. Essentially, you want to use keywords in your domain that show up in your website content. Alright, so you want to make your domain easy to remember. Of course, if you're out and you tell someone to go to your website and they don't write it down, you want them to be able to remember it later on when they sit down and try to go to it. And also try to keep it as short as possible, which pretty much goes hand in hand with make it easy to remember. Alright, so obviously there's times when you can't follow every one of these to a T, but just keep these in mind as a general tip, I guess, when you're thinking of domain names. Alright, so when you purchase a hosting account, a lot of times when you're signing up, you can actually purchase the domain, or you can use a domain you already have. And the one you use when you sign up for web hosting is usually your main domain name. Okay, that's the domain name for that account. But you can also purchase more domains and then add them to that same account. And those are called add-on domains. And it's really easy to do that, to add a new domain onto your account. And I'll show you later on how to do that when we go into cPanel. Alright, and the reason you would have add-on domains is you can have more websites on that account. As long as you stay within the realm of the allowed disk space and bandwidth, stuff like that, then a lot of times you wouldn't have a limit. Now, the HostGator, I think it was the Hatchling plan, the lowest shared hosting plan, I believe you could only have one domain. But then the next one up, which is I think only a few cents more expensive every month, you can have as many domains as you want. Alright, so hosting companies can put a limit on add-on domains. Alright, so parked domains they're domains that you can add to your account, your cPanel account, but they're not a separate website. Usually you would use this if you want multiple domains to go to the same site. Alright, so commonly if you have a .com, then you also purchase the .net, the .org, and all that, and then point them to the .com site. So that's what a parked domain is. Subdomains are pretty much variations of your main domain, and you can actually have your own websites on each subdomain. Alright, so an example, if we have a domain called mywebsite.com, we could create a subdomain called blog.mywebsite.com, and we could have a separate installation of WordPress or whatever system we're going to use on this domain. Alright, or if you have an e-commerce shop for your site, you could have store.mywebsite.com. Alright, so these domains here are only possible if you own mywebsite.com. Okay, so that's really it. I think that's enough reading and talking for now. In the next section, we will actually go to HostGator and purchase a domain, and we can talk more about this, and we'll also visit the domain name control panel, and we'll also talk about transferring a domain name.